it does seem like there's a fairly strong argument for JobSeeker to be increased by $75 a week. What's your view of that?
Well, my view is we need to look at all of this holistically. I mean, the increase we've had to JobSeeker, the coronavirus supplement, 2 one-off $750 payments, the easing of eligibility criteria for this is part of an overall package, and that includes things like JobKeeper. It includes things like the cash grants to small businesses, expanded instant asset write-off, early access to superannuation. So I think we really need to look at what sort of picture the economy is in, towards the back end of this year, and that's really what the 23rd July fiscal and economic update that the Treasurer is going to be delivering will look at. I mean, obviously, ideally we want as many people off welfare and off government benefits and back into the workforce and back into jobs as possible, but how much we can get that happening again is going to depend in large part upon our contact with the outside world, the level of tourism and education flows, but also our progress against the disease here and whether we can be easing social distancing restrictions a little more or whether we need to keep them in place for longer. So look, this is one of just many balls I think that are in the air, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to sort of seize on one particular vertical and say, well, we need to do this with this without having a mindset looking across the broader picture.
You'd have to admit, though, that it would be hard for people who've had that increased amount of JobSeeker to revert back to $40 a day, wouldn't you?
Well, absolutely, and I think it'll be hard for lots of parts of the economy when support is withdrawn. But I think we all know that the level of government support, the level of fiscal support to the economy is not sustainable in the longer term. We are going to need to wind back programs like JobKeeper. We are going to need to wind back programs like JobSeeker. We're going to need to get back to normal, and that's not going to be easy. I don't pretend it is. I mean, we saw some pretty scary job loss figures the week before last. Just last week, we had Qantas announcing 6,000 permanent layoffs. I mean, the unfortunate truth is this is a massive economic hit to the economy. We are not going to come out of this unscathed. Jobs are not going to come out of this unscathed. Businesses aren't going to come out of this unscathed, and it's going to be tough for a lot of people. There's no point sugarcoating that.
So would you support a rise in JobSeeker?
I think I'd need to see. I'm always interested in seeing what the case is for more government support for any sector. I think the point here to make, though, is that the money has to come from somewhere, and ultimately it comes from taxpayers. Government takes money from the economy through taxes, and it can return it through welfare. But every dollar that you spend on welfare is a dollar that you've taken out of the economy through increased taxes. So, you want to make sure that what you're doing is what supports the overall economy in the best way possible. And for us, and our view as a Liberal government, of course, is that the private sector and businesses and private enterprise are ultimately the engines that drive this prosperity, and that we need to get going as best as possible. Well, so that's the sort of thing we're going to need to weigh up. This
week does mark 20 years since the GST. Would you support that being increased?
Look, I mean, I think you're probably thinking I'm dodging these, but I think, again, there's a good case for tax reform, Peter. Yeah. But I think, look, it doesn't make much sense just looking at the single rate of the GST. We've got to look at things like company tax, income tax, state-based taxes like stamp duty and land tax, and the federal-state balance. Now, I've been interested in some of the conversations that have been happening in recent months over this. I think if there's a willingness of states to be partners in a comprehensive tax reform effort, then I think that would be an important precursor, because a lot of this is the inefficient state taxes that we need to address, and the imbalance between the federal government funding a lot of state activities but the states actually having to deliver them. Now, I think that would be a worthwhile exercise and a conversation to have, and of course you'd have the GST, its rate and its distribution and the exemptions to it as part of that conversation.
Well, I mean, Alexander Downer, I think he's written a piece for the AFR today. He says the GST at the moment is too low. Income and company taxes are too high. Does he have a point?
I think he makes a good case. I mean, I read the piece. I think it's quite persuasive. The hard thing, of course, and he would know this better than anyone, is tax reform is hard. I mean, when the GST was introduced 20 years ago, the Howard government, the first-term government, almost lost an election over it in 1998. There was Labor opposition to it, opposition in the Senate, which was only overcome with assistance from the Australian Democrats at the time. These things are quite difficult to do politically, and this was a reform that was revenue neutral. It wasn't increasing people's taxes overall. But the change in it, there's always vested interest in the status quo, and that's what you've got to overcome. So, as a theoretical exercise, yes, tax reform is good. As a practical exercise in politics, I wouldn't underestimate the difficulties of it.
David, I just want to get your thoughts on these ASIO raids on the weekend. A report in The Australian this morning, this is about this New South Wales Labor MP, that he was driven by deep security concerns and he could be taking instructions. That's the report that has come from ASIO. How much of a concern is that for you?
It is very concerning. I mean, look, this is a newspaper report, and I know that officially, I think ASIO has only said, they conducted this raid in furtherance of an investigation into foreign interference. He hasn't been charged. I don't think his advisor has been charged either. But I think it is very concerning. I mean, we have seen episodes of this in Australia. We saw former New South Wales Senator Sam Dastyari, who was seemingly changing his position and arguing against his own party's position on issues like the South China Sea because of some influence from mainland Chinese authorities and diaspora bodies. And the allegation seems to be the same here with Shaoquett Moselmane, that he was basically acting as a spokesperson for Beijing in return for some sort of favour or benefit. That's the allegation, and it's a very serious one.
Is it a reminder of how prevalent foreign interference is at the moment? And this comes, a week after the Prime Minister announced this ongoing problem with cybersecurity?
I think it should be a wake-up call, more than just a reminder. These things are happening. People who are in the intelligence and security world have known about this for a number of years. Aggressive cyber attacks, attempts at foreign interference, attempts at interference using diaspora communities and things like that. But this is not a sort of statecraft Australia is used to seeing, and certainly not at least since the end of the Cold War. But we are seeing these quite aggressive actions which undermine, some of our very institutions, our sovereignty, our freedom of action, our freedom to take decisions in our own interest. And this is why we need to combat it very fiercely. And this investigation, this raid on Friday last week, is I think the first fruit of the new foreign interference task force that was announced and stood up towards the end of last year by the Prime Minister, which was designed to basically coordinate and centralise and strengthen efforts to stamp down on foreign interference and enforce these important laws we've got against it.
Conversely, there's a report in the Global Times today, which is Chinese state media. Australia is escalating spying efforts against Beijing. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is a classic disinformation campaign designed to muddy the waters. I mean, this is it's look over here sort of stuff. Like it's they say they're doing this, but we've also caught them doing this. I don't attach much credibility to it. I heard the media reports of that report. Of course, look, Australia is a frequent subject of the editorial in the Global Times. It's usually about once a week that we seem to appear in there, and there's a rotating roster of Canada being the villain one day and the United States the other and the United Kingdom the following day. So I don't think we should pay much stock to it, but I think it suggests that they're watching quite closely what happens here in Australia, and they feel a little vulnerable about it because we are obviously touching on a raw nerve.
OK, well, just for clarification, Dave Sharma, is Australia increasing its spying on Beijing?
Peter, I wouldn't be aware of that, even if that was the case. I'm just a mere member of Parliament, not part of the executive. But look, any big country like China, I don't think we conduct spying or espionage. We conduct open diplomatic relations.
All right.